Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here, and guys, I'm very excited for the interview we have with us today. We have Rodgers with us today from the School of Man, and the thing I'm really excited about is taking a look at, showing up as, the man, the husband, the father you need to, because I think, frankly, that's really the pillars our society is built on. So, Cole, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, my man.
Jeremy, I can't thank you enough, brother. This is honestly a dream come true to be a guest on your podcast, and I love talking about this topic. I love talking about this topic.
I'm excited to have you on today because, we've really shifted a lot in the last couple of years of what we discuss in the podcast. As we are talking about more, social issues. We're talking about more politics. We're talking about things that we really think matter, and I think the biggest one of those things that matters is family and manhood, right? Because if we don't have those things, then all the other things we're doing don't matter.
No, I 100% agree. And I will tell you, anytime I talk about this specific topic, I always come from my story, right? Because that's the best way I know how to teach. That's the best way that I have honestly helped other men be reborn and find their future self and chase after that future self and leave their former self in the dirt. And none of us would ever want to go to a dentist that has jacked up teeth, right? So when we're having these conversations, it's really important to me that the listeners, your audience, and just us as men are coming from a place of relatability.
Yes.
And so from my perspective, really where it all started to turn for me was 5.5 years ago. And in the SOM, the one thing we talk about a tremendous amount, and we've got so many great men that are involved that are doing the right things, and they don't have to have a book. They don't necessarily are going to be on YouTube or anything like that. But the one thing I see that all men that truly embrace their manhood, who truly start to live and not exist, as our ethos says, start embracing their pain. And pain is such a equalizer for us once you start distilling it into purpose and promise. But here's the kicker. So many men in today's world, as we've all heard, really run away from it, run away from the hard, and really are seeking more comfort. I mean, think about it, Jeremy, how, men are being celebrated for having a dad bod.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where in the world that actually started, how it started, why it started, even if it was a funny meme. It's not funny to me.
No, I call the dad bod a heart attack risk. That's what it looks like to me, man.
100%. And I mean, think about it from the perspective of your wife. Why would she ever want to pursue somebody that's just not taking care of themselves?
Yes.
And, so that's just where our society really has drifted off to, is more of just that comfort-seeking mindset, that complacency mindset. And really the men that scare the hell out of me are the guys that experience some success, and then they just start getting soft over time. They start getting complacent, and that's where that dad bod craze has come in, right? Or like, hey, I have nothing else to prove, etc. And then all of a sudden, when something happens in a man's life, like adversity, like where it really came to head with me about 5.5 years ago, when Ashley was just headed out the door, just ready to leave, strike three, I'm done. Is you train how you fight how you train.
Yes.
And so many men have zero training, or their training is still back in high school. And I'm not talking just physical. I'm talking about mental, emotional, spiritual.
Well, no, and the way we treat people and the way we prepare for 100%. Our day, the way we go through it, like so many people are, they're adults that act like they're 13,
And they're expecting results on the other side, and they always wonder why they can't microwave success. I see it all day long in all the coaching that I do, from east to west, from the three little words behind a man's name like CEO to a man that's just looking to get his start. And that's where things are shifting, I do believe. And there are so many other great organizations out there that are bringing that to light. But men's groups have been around for thousands of years. It's been around since Jesus walked the earth. Before that, when we were cavemen looking for fire, working together, all that, there has to be a renaissance period now, a revolution when it comes to manhood. And I'm not specifically talking about going, backwards and, suppressing everything. I'm polar opposite. My greatest superpower is vulnerability, but I have the ability to use that vulnerability to not just make myself better, because we're all seeking one thing, Jeremy, and that's freedom. We've shed blood over it for thousands of years, right? Is freedom. I mean, all men want 5 things. They want fitness, mental, physical, emotional. They want to make love. They want to have a great relationship with their children. They want to lead. But the number one common denominator for all men is freedom. But the funny thing is that it's in reverse, because so many men, I would say the majority of men out there, and I'm not throwing or casting stones, choose the opposite. Choose the opposite. So I'm proud of you for taking on having these types of discussions, because they're needed more than they've ever been. I mean, think about what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
Think about what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
you know what? One of the interesting things around that is too is there's been a shift in culture where I think guys are realizing like something's wrong, right? Like we need to approach this differently. But I think at the same time, there's been this weird shift of guys confusing manlyhood and masculinity with being a dick.
I agree.
Do you know what I mean? Like being a dick doesn't make you a man, right? Like taking care of your family and having morals and values that build your life off of that makes you a man. Being a dick doesn't make you that.
No, I 100% agree. It goes back to World War I and World War II, and I'm a big patriot, big supporter of our vets, and I love history. And as a man, right now I don't watch a ton of TV.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, and I really don't watch a ton of news unless it's relative to what's going on and I need to know. So I do it from a cerebral perspective.
Sure.
But the one show I have watched is 1883. And, if you haven't watched 1883 with Tim McGraw, Sam Elliott, Faith Hill, and it's the prequel to Yellowstone, it just amazes me really what our country has gone through. And this is where I'm kind of getting to in the evolution of men, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can see it on the face in Tim McGraw. You can see it in World War I. You can see it in World War II. Those generations, right? Everything as a man was, you know what? You better not say a damn thing. And if you're hurting inside, push that stuff down as far as you possibly can. And that's what I was doing, kind of going back to what we originally launched in the podcast. And why my story resonates with so many men out there, because I'm a raw, real, and just ultra vulnerable guy, is when I was first married to Ashley, and I had no clue. It's not like marriage came with a manual at the age of 27.
Right.
And the only thing I knew what to do, Jeremy, was produce. And I knew that when I got married to her, that I was going to provide her the best life. And if the bank account was full, then everything else was going to take care of itself, right? Well, needless to say, I brought in some unhealthy habits to that marriage, lying being number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, I came through I'm 38 years young, so Adderall made its way into college when you were cramming for a test, and it turned into using it for parties, etc. So the evening of our marriage, the rehearsal dinner, I went out until midnight, found my wife's room, met her there. She was asleep. I was drunk. I was on all kinds of Adderall, and I remember sitting on the bed and bouncing off of the bed into the floor, and her just bawling her eyes out. That's how I started off my marriage.
Wow.
And we get up the next day. I didn't sleep, and I take more Adderall just to make it through the day. We go to Costa Rica, and when we get to Costa Rica, so the first thing that I thought on my mind was, all right, how much sex can we have? Plain and simple. Well, it was that time of the month for Ashley. And by the way, we've told this story in countless times in other forums, so this isn't going to be news to her if she listens to it either. And there was another pivotal moment in our relationship as we were just getting started. And we met on eHarmony. So this was back when eHarmony was just getting its start. I'm sorry to go off on this tangent.
No, it's fine.
But I was so embarrassed, Jeremy, to tell people that I met my wife on eHarmony, and that was me wearing a mask.
I met my wife on Facebook. We didn't tell anybody for 10 years, so,
Yeah, and I told everybody I met her at the Harris Teeter, a grocery store. And people believed me, but I lied, right? Like I was putting on all these masks because I cared so much about what other people's opinions were about me. Mm-hmm. And while we were on our honeymoon, I mean, she wouldn't have oral sex with me. So therefore, I left the room and left her crying in the shower and went and got drunk at the bar. That was the first part of my marriage, which then proceeded into us talking about it at home and us just saying, I just don't know if this is going to work out. And me saying that. Well, lo and behold, she was pregnant with our first child, Ava Madison. I had just took a new job, and my income went from $120,000, which I thought was a lot of money at that time, to $60,000. You know, cut it in half, and was launching a business in the insurance industry on the employee benefits side. After 1 year, it went to zero.
Wow.
So through that entire time, I blew my Achilles. I get married. I go in the hospital for staph infection. We are struggling financially, which you know as well as I do. For a man, that comes with a lot of insecurities and self-doubt.
Yes.
All right. My daughter is born 6 weeks premature, and she flatlines on the table.
Wow.
So my wife was preeclamptic Ash, and they had to rush them into emergency surgery. Flatlines. And thank God for that nurse. I don't know where she is today, but she's the one that saved my daughter and saved my wife. I remember crying for just about 15 minutes. We'd been at the hospital all day, exhausted. But when my daughter was born, I held her maybe for 15 minutes, and then I went back to my phone and went back to work, because where my mind was, I had to go put food on the table. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, I'll let mama do mom things, but I have to go put food on the table, and I have hardly any income coming in. She's an accountant. We've got a $12,000 deductible and out-of-pocket co-insurance to cover on the medical plan, and so I'm in debt right out the bat, right? So as a young couple, that's how I started out, and that's really what 5 years looked like in the first part of my marriage. So everything that I did, number one, I was seeking external validation, which a lot of men do. Some men die seeking validation. I did not start off my marriage well. I was a new father. 12 months after Ava Madison was born, I was a father for the second time. Those first 3 years were challenging, yes, but honestly were the pain that I talked about to help me down the road have to realize the transformation that had to occur, or I was going to lose everything as a man. And that entire time, I'm snorting Adderall off of my desk at work. If I couldn't get Adderall, I was finding B12 at Walgreens, crushing it up. If I couldn't do that, then I was doing cocaine, and she had no clue. Just like the night we went to Oxford, Mississippi to watch Ole Miss and UCA, I was doing lines of cocaine while she was pregnant with Landon. It was a month after Ava Madison was born, or a couple months. I went out on the square. If no one's ever been to Oxford, it's a incredible college town, football party town. Went out on the square by myself, came back just in time to make her coffee, to act like I had just gotten out of bed, drive home to Little Rock, get pulled over by a state trooper, and I was still high, and he lets me go. That was the whole thing that was going on. And the reason why I give everybody who is listening that glimpse into my story is because as men, and again, this is important, men do not feel right now that they have the ability to still be a man, right? To still be that badass that they want to see staring back in the mirror, but also be vulnerable and be able to put their flaws out there. And that's where things become a slippery slope with a man. And it becomes a hidden killer in men's lives. So they just say, what the hell? I'm not, at the end of the day, I'll just continue to do what I'm doing right now and hope that things change, and we know they never do. For 5-6 years, that went on, and that was a pattern in my life. And it was, my number one addiction was white lying to my wife.
What flipped the switch for you? Like, what changed that? Because, knowing you now and how you're helping guys, like you're a very different person now than the person you're describing here. Like, what changed for you?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Well, of course, it goes back to pain. Mm-hmm. It goes back to when you see someone that you inflict so much pain on, and you see her cry multiple times in the therapist's office, right? And really what flipped the switch was I went to the Masters, and man, professionally, money started flowing in. I thought it would take care of itself. And my marriage was a sexless marriage, plain and simple. If we were having sex, it was because, to be totally frank, it was checking the box, right? There was no intimacy there. I had given her no reason to pursue me. Mm-hmm. And it was at the Masters, and I basically had a self-sabotage loop happen again. And I met her at her parents' on the East Coast, and I'll never forget laying in the floor of her cousin's bedroom upstairs getting ready for a wedding. That's what I was meeting her there for her cousin's wedding. Mm-hmm. I hadn't been asleep for 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, this is no way to live. I mean, just not 24 hours ago, I was at a strip club in Atlanta. Like, this isn't, I mean, and then I'm sitting here trying to put on this happy husband, hero dad face, and I'm further from the truth. I was disgusted with what I saw back in the mirror, but me being me, and a lot of men are like this, I could put on a mask with the best of them. Mm-hmm. So where the pivotal moment came, and I started realizing that, is I knew I was on the verge of losing it all, right? I was already on strike 1, strike 2. We've been in therapy. I was seeking for something different, and I came across Mark Divine's book, The Way of the Seal, in Barnes & Noble, and that's when I picked it up, and I was like, you know what? My mind's a mess, meaning like it was complete monkey mind. I am addicted to stress with what I do, even though money was flowing in. My wife and I have a non-existent relationship, but we'll act like we have one in front of my family. You know, I struggled with chronic masturbation, so there was no point in pursuing her, right? I had all these flaws, and I didn't have a strong network either. I was a lone wolf. And so many men, your network equals your net worth. We hear that all the time, but you also hear too, like, hey man, if you die with 5 good friends, you're doing great. Screw that. I mean, that's sad. If you die with 5 good friends, that's sad. You have to go seek to surround yourself with men that are better than you. And at that point, when I read Divine's book, I was like, what the hell? What do I have to lose? And after I picked up his book, it wasn't a week later that I was in Springfield, Missouri, and I was meeting with a client, took them out to dinner, took one bite of my food, and I locked up. I would get indigestion super bad, like extremely bad, to where I'd have to go make myself throw up. Wow. I went to this, it was in a hole-in-the-wall Mexican restaurant, one holer of a bathroom. Someone gets out of it. I go in it, and I sit there, and it felt like I wrestled with an alligator. And for about 15, 20 minutes, and that's not an exaggeration, I was losing airway, just trying my best to throw up the food that I was eating because I was so stressed out, right? Finally, it came up, and I just laid there with my tie loose, just laid there on the cold concrete floor, and I just said, you know what? I'm going to die in a hotel room somewhere if I do not take this seriously. And that's when I started diving more into the Way of the Seal, Seal Fit, and started, expanding my worldviews and expanding who I was, and starting to box breathe and meditate and do an intense amount of journaling. And I knew that for me to save my family, I had to save myself first, right? I knew that was a part of the equation. You hear it all the time, but very few people follow through on it.
And that's huge, because I've seen it in so many people, right? Like, you look at parents that say, okay, well, I have to help my kids, I have to do this, I have to do that, and they sacrifice everything for themselves, and they can't show up in the best way to then be that person to help those people. 100%. And if you can't show up, then what's the point?
100%. You're 100%. So that's 100% correct, and that's really what for those 2 years I did. And I dove head first into my therapy. I took everything that Mark wrote in that book and other authors, and I just followed it. And I was by myself at this point, right? I was never by myself, but I was not around men that were going to make me better. One thing we say in Psalm all the time is that when you're the best in the room, you got to find a new room. And if you can't find that room, then you got to build that room. You got to create your own realities, right? And that's just where I was at the time. So I go out, I link up, go to the Unbeatable Mind Conference, meet a mentor of mine to this day, Brandon, and Brandon takes me under his wing. Recovering alcoholic and successful financial planner, and just really connected with him. I was like, damn, this dude's like in his 40s, and I'm sitting here in my early 30s, around 30, 31, and this dude is jacked. He's super connected with his wife. When I was just watching and listening, talk to her, not in a creepy way, of course, but I was just, I was admiring him, you know. And I watch people and I study. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And he went for a 6-mile run, which is funny. And he comes back, and I said, man, I don't think I could ever do that. And he just laughed. He said, yeah, you can. You can do that. And lo and behold, I'm doing 12 rounds of Murph tonight. And so I started to expand my horizons and really started to believe in the possibility. In that trip, I had not ran a mile since I blew out my Achilles, and I had 2 surgeries and had a stint in the hospital because of it. And I ran my first mile that trip. So just a different environment started producing different images in my mind of who the man I was chasing. And then I started to really believe in it and upgrade it. And I had no other choice to do so. But here's the one thing that I had yet to face, and that was the lying to my wife. And you fast forward 12 months later, things are better in the home. I buy a CrossFit gym. It was a failing CrossFit gym here in Little Rock. And I said, you know what? If there's guys that screwed up, if I'm this screwed up, there's got to be more professionals like me that are screwed up. Men that struggle with dropping the mask, that want to be more vulnerable, but we're going to do it through fitness. And this was when I was getting back into fitness. And I'd always been an athlete, you know, growing up until my Achilles blew playing basketball. But the CrossFit gym was more than we asked for, to be totally candid. I mean, it was a dumpster fire. Mm-hmm. And it about broke our marriage. Now, it wasn't our primary income. It was the second business. And I wanted to take that business and use it as a platform, honestly, to do what I'm doing today. I had no clue that it was going to be School of Man. To be totally frank. I had no clue it was going to be School of Man. Went through a business partner. I'm putting in a ton of cash, ton of capital just to cover payroll. And that fall, I was going through Kokoro. And so I go through Kokoro, graduate through Kokoro, and that is where the actual turning point happened. That's when I was finally brought to my knees. We are presented so many false summits in life, it's incredible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us take them for hook, line, and sinker, me included, right? Yeah. Like a lot of men feel like they've arrived. Whether it be they hit this amount of money in their bank account, hit a certain income, get the girl, have the kids, whatever. You've never arrived. Like, I'm just going to repeat that. None of us have ever arrived or will ever arrive. There's always new starting lines in this world. And
I think when you think you have is when you're actually in trouble, right? Because that's the day you stop working on yourself and the day you stop improving.
Exactly right. And so I graduate through Kokoro, but and I have a necklace, and I don't know if this will make it on the video or not, but I wear it everywhere I go, and it's of Kirk Deligiannis, and Kirk passed away at the event. And at the very end, I mean, he was my swim buddy. He was the one that would judge my Murph, and he was the one that we ran all the hills together, rucked together. I won't go through that entire story, but when he passed, it woke me up. I mean, it just completely, utterly woke me up. I don't know how it couldn't wake anybody up at that point.
I think that's interesting because I think experiences because we've been talking a lot about adversity. We've been talking about how how that can change you. And I think experiences like that are interesting from the perspective of it can be something that sets you in the right direction, or it can be something that sets you totally in the wrong direction, right? It's not one of those things that keeps you where you are.
That's a very good point. I agree with you. I do agree with you. And that was a turning point for me. And really where the turning point was, Jeremy, was that 2 weeks later, my story, someone got a hold of my story here locally, and they asked me to come on the radio and tell it in full. It was like a 2.5-hour episode. And I told the whole thing. That was the first, like me on the mic right now with you. It was the first. Now, keep in mind, I'd been in therapy with Ashley for 3 years, close to it. We've spent thousands of dollars, right? We're moving in the right direction. We're making love again. I'm very happy with the man that I see in the mirror, but I was still ashamed to tell her everything. The cocaine, the Adderall, the masturbation, right? Like the list was endless that I would lie, because as a man, we've been taught to judge it, 3 things, man. You benchmark yourself on 3 things: the girl, athletics, and power or money, whatever. And I was too ashamed, because I knew the minute that I would tell her the truth, she would leave me. So what do? Hey, it's best to be unknown, but we all know how that works, and that's exactly what happened. So I get on this radio show, and they start interviewing me, and for whatever reason at that point, I just let it all go, man. I just basically said, screw it. I don't care anymore. I've got to get this stuff off my chest. I'm perfectly flawed. I'm going to own it, and if there's one person out there that can resonate or relate to my story, awesome. Well, that one person that was honestly listening that had never heard it in therapy in full was her.
Oh, my gosh.
We were back in the therapist office. J.C. McDaniel, who's a part of the School of Man now, my therapist, Marine, veteran, combat deployments, just a phenomenal man. I mean, he looked at me and he knifed handed me just like a cadre or a drill sergeant would. And he said, I can't do anything for you. And he just basically said, I need you to un-F yourself.
Wow.
Un-F yourself. He said, I don't want to see you again. I don't want your money. I don't know what else to tell you right now at this point. And he was 100% right, because on the other side of the couch was Ashley crying again. And, I've never believed in quitting. And, that really comes back to, I walked off of a job when I was 19, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget how my dad's face was when I told him. And I vowed to myself I would never quit again. And when we were in the car and she's crying, she says, I don't know what to do with you. And she's doing it, if you've ever seen anybody cry in hysteria, whatever, you're just sitting there. There's nothing you can say. And I knew it. I was just like, hey, we're back at square one. Every day is day one at this point now. You are back to rebuilding everything that you built up. You just basically threw a match on it. And I knew I had to do that. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. And I did it on that microphone that day. And she was listening it with all my family. And I come from a family, and I love them. God, I love them. But I come from a family that you don't talk about your finances. You keep your shit on lockdown. You don't air out your dirty laundry type of deal. And oh my God, if you do, in the world of social media and the world of podcast, everything else, you take a deep breath. Like, I can't believe you did that. Well, I did it. And that's what happened afterwards. But it was the best thing that ever happened for me. So that's a long way around to get to what we were talking about earlier about manhood. 5 years, a real man in my book, and that's what I talk about all the time. What is a real man? A real man, number one, is going to first admit he is perfectly flawed. And you can substitute other words for perfectly flawed. The minute you get that out of the way, Jeremy, and you embrace that, is the minute you can start moving forward. Doesn't mean that you're a less of a man. Doesn't mean that just because you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're rolling and you're on the gun, or whatever it is that you're doing, or whatever it is that you read and whatever you see, okay? All that shit can be a mirage. Going on the CrossFit, I see it all the time in CrossFit gyms. You're not handling your shit. A real man handles his shit, and the first thing he does is he admits he's perfectly flawed. And sometimes you got to be brought to your knees, and more times than not, it's at your hands. That when you're brought to your knees, it's your doing.
It's interesting, because I feel like fitness is such a huge part and a really good comparison to a lot of these situations, right? Because I look at how I got strong. At one point in time, I was lifting heavy stuff, and people are like, "Whoa, how do you do that?" Well, you don't walk in day one and do that. I did what I call linear progression. 5 pounds a week for 10 years is a lot of weight. But it's the same time of you have days when you walk into the gym, and it's knowing when, you don't have it versus when you don't mentally want to do it, right? Like when you don't mentally want to do it, you push yourself through it. But when you know something's off about your body, you don't push it, right? It's the same type of thing about, like learning how to be a better man, right? It's knowing what's right and what's wrong in certain situations. Do you get what I'm saying?
I 100% get what you're saying. I mean, it's a game of inches.
Yeah.
And we want to, and I see it all the time, guys that come in some and come out of some you gotta trust the process. Sometimes you don't even know what the hell that process is, so you have to have blind trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you're going to take every wrong turn to finally take the hard step on the path. And that's exactly where I was at that time, and that's exactly what started planning Psalm. And what I decided to do, I was like, well, my network equals my net worth, and right now my self-worth is damn near bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been that couple that's only had $5 to our name, that we could only afford the formula for our child. And I had to take a barbecue magazine back because we couldn't afford it. And that's a true story. My wife made me take a barbecue magazine back at Christmas when Ava Madison was born, because it was a decision we had to make between that barbecue magazine that I just wanted to read. And that hit my ego pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
To a family that's grown a very successful business. So I've seen both sides, and you have to trust the process, understanding that everything you're going through is happening for you and not to you. Mm-hmm. A lot of us look at it the opposite way. We look at all the gaps in our life. We look at, why is this happening to me versus why is this happening for me? I look back and I don't regret anything, because this is what God wanted for me. And
I think at the same time, though, that's also the thing that wider society tells all of us, not just men, right? Like we're I feel like especially in the last 20 years more than ever, we're taught to be victims, right? Like, you have this disability, or you have this disadvantage, or you have this other thing. When if you look at it, right, adversity itself, it's kind of like a blacksmith's furnace, right? Mm-hmm. Metal goes into it and it's not correct and it's damaged and it's whatever it may be, and it goes in there and it gets melted down and it becomes what it's supposed to be. So your quote unquote victimhood or your disadvantage is just something you have to work through and figure out another way, and it's there, and it can create this ability in you and this thing that you could never have if you didn't push through it. Do you get what I'm saying?
I get 100% what you're saying. It's going back to what we're talking about in manhood too. I think more men are bought into the bullshit narrative that it's easier to quit than to endure.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what's the point, right? Like that's what a lot of men say. What's the point? I don't want this growth that bad, or I don't want to transform this that bad. I don't want to obsess on having a better marriage, so I'll just prefer staying status quo. When 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, Jeremy, that's just another form of poverty, brother.
Yes.
And when men are of the majority of that 80% and they buy into that, again, that's what our society is pressing down upon men, on top of all the other social crap that's out there. And this is just me speaking real.
Yeah.
But but at the same time, it's not society's responsibility to help you be a man. That's your responsibility. There's two things that we as men control. That's ourselves and that's our attitude. That's it at the end of the day. And, where we have, really it's been over the past decade that I've seen it, just little by little, men allowing the world to strip them of their quote unquote manhood, if you will.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
No one can take that away from me. No one can take that away from you. I know plenty of men, plenty of veterans that multiple combat tours. I mean, guys that work for Psalm, that it takes a real man when you're in that spot to start breaking down walls.
Yes.
Right? And start exploring parts of your heart and emotions and spirit that you've never done because you've had to turn that stuff off. Right?
Well, for somebody listening then, we hear how it worked for you. We hear how, we hear how School of Man works. For somebody listening, they say, I just need to make that change. Like what is that thing? What is that first step? Is it a mindset? Is it a daily habit? Like, what is that first thing that moves you?
Yeah, that's another good question. Plenty of books out on, daily habits, creating rhythms, etc. I mean, I even created a journal for men for the men in School of Men called the Battle Guide. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The first step for any man doing anything, right, is raising your hand. And we say that all the time in Psalm. Just raise your hand. All right. Meaning like, all right, now I'm ready to accept. I'm ready to actually take the hard step on the path. You're not even there of developing a habit yet. You're not. Until you actually are fully committed, truly desire a different life in chasing your future self, you're always going to repeat and you're always going to create self-sabotaging loops. So you have to, at that point, have to fully commit. That's it. That's where everything starts. I don't care if it's going to the gym. I don't care if it's launching a business, winning your wife back, getting a better body, whatever. It starts with commitment. And then from there, here's what I will also say. So many of us are so mesmerized as men with the how because we're fixers. That's what we've been taught to be. Like, especially guys like me and guys like you, men that are leaders, men that are running businesses, doing podcasts, fathers and husbands, etc. I mean, I think we've all been in those conversations with our wives where all you want to do is fix it. And then she's like, I just want to vent. I'm like, shit, that's really hard. All right. Figure out, and this is what's more important to me, the who is greater than the how. Your who is greater than the how. So the first thing you have to do is commit. So when I first committed, then I started looking for answers. You know, it's like Tony Robbins says all the time, your greatest resource is resourcefulness. So when you're that hungry and you're obsessed on creating a new life, a new reality as a man, winning your own heart back, loving thyself, because that's the greatest gift we can all give ourselves as men, know thyself, then you start getting really, really hungry and obsessed with this better life. Because a lot of times we've been in that status quo, that 80% that lives paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
So it's going to feel a lot different. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel awkward. You're going to bump up against your upbringing to your goals. And that commitment is going to start leading you down different areas. You're going to have to start shedding some of these guys that just aren't serving your dreams anymore. And that's on you. It's not on them. And then you start putting the pieces together to create the greatest network in the world for yourself and your family, and it becomes reciprocity at that point.
Yeah.
Through that, what we said earlier, as a man, once you start building these new rooms and building your own reality, it's amazing the people that start showing up in your life. Psalm has been in existence for 4.5 years. It became an organic movement, grassroots movement. It's growing rapidly. But the thing I'm most proud of is that if I die, if God takes me up today, this thing has so much momentum it continues to roll on because of the men that are in it. And I strategically found men that were going to make me better. A better husband, a better father, right? A better leader, a better man, just overall. Because I knew these areas that I was super weak at. And that just starts that first step, commitment and vulnerability and resourcefulness. If you want it that bad, you're going to put in the work and you're going to surround yourself with those that are going to help you lift the ship. You're going to be the tide that lifts the ship. You're not going to be the ship on the tide.
Well, and they're also the ones that if you're saying, you know what, today is the day I don't want to lift the ship, they say, you know, man, I get it, but we got to lift that ship today. I think that's the same thing as well, is that's that right type of that right type of accountability, but at the same time makes you better, but doesn't put you down. You know what I mean?
100%. Life is push and pull, man. There are going to be days that you need to be pushed, and there's going to be days that you're pulling people along. And that's just the truth, and that's what I found just over these past 4.5 years. I mean, Ashley and I are better than we've ever been. I love the man that I see staring back in the mirror, right? I have a stand. So many men don't have a stand. Jeremy.
Yeah. They don't stand. They don't stand for anything, and that's why they get pummeled.
Well, and that's right. I mean, it goes back to I'm sure it's a favorite quote of yours too. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
Yes.
Well, the reason why weak men create hard times is what we're talking about. That's where we are. That's the era that we're in. We're reaching a period of renaissance, though, in my opinion. That's what we're all looking for and doing. And, where I started looking, I went to a men's group, and this entire time leading up to Kirk and then the last straw with Ashley, I mean, I didn't believe in God. I grew up Catholic and went to Catholic school, fell out of touch with God, didn't believe in God at all, pretty much had non-existence. And I define God different today than I did when I was Catholic. But, I went to this men's group here locally, and I told my story in full, just like this. I mean, poured my heart out there. And they looked at me, and then they went back to their book. And I was like, man, something's not right. We've got to create an environment. And I'm not saying that's every one of them, so I don't want to paint a broad brush. But that's what led me to, I was like, man, men need to get back to training like how we were created to train, because we fight how we train, right? So that's how I said, I do hard shit. I like to do that. I'd like to do that, but what that does is, and what I've learned along the way, is it opens men's emotions and the vulnerability that we need to help him when it comes to coaching. And every man needs a coach. If Tom Brady has a coach, by God, I have a coach.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw that we have a major problem even with men's groups in today's world. There's no one having an attention to result, a progression mindset, right? An evolution to where you should never be the same man, ever. And that's not what God wants for any of us. You shouldn't want it for yourself. But the fact is, more men are dying now, 30s and 40s. We just don't bury them until they're in their 80s. And that is a true statement there, Jeremy.
Well, you know what's interesting is this aligns really well with what my friend Eric Rogel has been saying, and that's that one of the biggest things we're losing in society is we're losing the warriors in society. Now that does not mean that we're going to war and we're fighting people, but it's the way you train and the mindset you bring and the way you approach life, and that is when a man can do that, it's when you reach kind of the optimum level of what you could be, what you're meant to be.
100%. I mean, you're going to receive a knock at the door. I don't care who you are. It doesn't have to be with bullets. I think that we need to get past that. I mean, my mom's been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. This morning, we get a call from Ashley's parents. Her dad's cancer's back, and they've got to take his bladder.
Sorry to hear that.
It's life, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that. But, our son's autistic. He was diagnosed with that in January. The car's going to break down. Shit's just going to happen. And the fact of the matter is, in January, I'm so fortunate to have the greatest network in the world in SOM, but that week when Landon was diagnosed autistic, Jeremy, and our dog passed away after 17 years, put our dog down the day after Landon gets diagnosed with autism. My wife, doesn't know how to handle it. At this point, she's trying to figure it all out. I was doing power cleans in my garage, getting ready for my 24 hours of Murph, and man, I literally picked up a box, put a box over my head, and screamed in it, and then walked upstairs into a spare bedroom and wrestled with pillows and drop kicked them. The point I'm trying to make there, guys, and to the listeners out there, is this: it's okay to admit stuff like that, but you have to be able to go to a place like that. So a warrior, he's going to fight how he trains. And why I say that is that I have a place to go. I have a place to put it out there. I have a place to work through it. I have a place to be able to identify, is there self-doubt creeping in? Am I self-deprecating? The number of things that, men deal with, right? But because in the future, there's going to be another knock at the door. Don't know what it's going to be. I don't sit there and focus on it because that just creates fear. So as a warrior, it's your responsibility to train physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, and spiritually so that you are ready for when the fight shows up at your doorstep.
And it will, and the fight's going to be different types of fight, right? It's going to be, the problems you said that came up for you. It's going to be the things that happen in your life. It's going to be political change. It's going to be social
100%.
change. There's different types of fights that come, and if you do not prepare for your fight, it doesn't have to be a physical one. then you're going to be taken down by those things.
100%. Yeah, and that's why I was basically given that context about January. It'd be totally different 5 years prior, not having the solid brotherhood that I do have, but also the training that I have under my belt, and I would have responded emotionally.
Yes.
And that's the other thing that I see a lot of right now. Men are responding emotionally to everything, triggered by everything. You know, whether it be the news, politics, whatever. A dangerous man is a man that can harness his emotions. And when I say dangerous man, I mean that in the most positive sense. But I see more men who they let their emotions control them, and emotions will kill you at the end of the day. They really will. They make you weak unless you know how to use them.
Yeah. Well, Cole, I've really enjoyed this conversation for our listeners. You know, if they want to connect with you, if they want to find out more about School of Man, like, how are they going to do that?
Yeah, and I've enjoyed it too, Jeremy. I really appreciate you bringing me on and giving me the platform. You know, with me, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Cole Rodgers. Find School of Man, same place, at the School of Man. You can also find us on LinkedIn too. And don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always wanting to have a conversation. Like, DM me. You can shoot me an email, cole@schoolofman.live, and I promise you I'm going to respond. And go to schoolofman.live. There's a ton of stuff going on over there, and pick up our book. And I promise you, it's not my book, it's our book. There's so many men who have decided to drop the old body armor, drop the mask, and just tell their story in full in that book. And that's what I'm most proud of, Jeremy.
Very cool. Well, Cole Rodgers, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, my friend.
Likewise, Jeremy. Appreciate it, brother. Own the day.